Going to give folks about 10 more seconds. How do you rate your current knowledge of this topic? Click on the button that corresponds with your answer. The little circle right there, and it will record your answer. It looks like we got quite a good number of folks who are moderate, which is great. A couple people minimal. This is good. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and begin on the top of the hour at 3 o'clock. So with that being said, we will go ahead and welcome everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining today's webinar. Let me move this ahead here. Trauma and Stress, Worldview, Signs, and Symptoms. My name is William Moore, and I'm with OJJDP's NTTAC, and I would like to take a couple of minutes to go over a few webinar technology pieces for you all to have a better webinar experience. Please note that this webinar is indeed brought to you by our colleagues at the Innocent Justice Foundation. You can find more information about the Innocent Justice Foundation at www.shiftwellness.net. Or you can contact them at shiftwellness.net/contact us. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be published on our YouTube page. If you'd like to review past webinars, you may visit our YouTube page by clicking the link here. If you'd like to receive a transcript and supporting materials, then please be sure to contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of PowerPoint slides and other pertinent items, you may do so by locating the Handouts pod, which is directly above the chat window. Here you'll find the webinar PowerPoint and also additional handouts that will help with today's presentation. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the Download Files button, and you will download the file directly to the device that you're joining from. At the end of today's webinar, our presenters will address questions that are posed during today's presentation. Please type your question into the chat box and click the bubble icon or enter to submit your questions. Please submit your questions throughout today's presentation and we will address them at the end. Now, for those of you who are joining by yourself, there's no need to do anything at this time. However, individuals who may be joined in a group, meaning it's yourself and maybe one or two additional individuals, please help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. So for example, if I'm watching this webinar with my mom, I will put 1 because I'm counting my mom. So type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing by yourself, there's no need to type anything at this time. Now, for those who are joined in the group, please note that the people who are signed in to Adobe Connect will receive an automatic email that will contain their certificate of attendance. If you are joined with another individual and you would like for them to receive a certificate, then please download the group validation form where we will ask you to please provide the name and information of that individual so that we may send them a certificate of attendance as well. You may contact OJJDP TTA at usdoj.gov to receive a certificate from the additional individuals who are joined with you. That being said, I'm going to turn over today's presentation to Beth Medina for our webinar. Beth, take it away.
Thanks so much, William. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm glad you're here with us today. The Innocent Justice Foundation, our SHIFT program, was designed to support Internet Crimes Against Children task force teams and officer wellness. So we are the training and technical assistance provider for officer wellness and mental health and well-being. And we travel across the country in times that are not related to COVID. We get to do a lot of in-person training to talk about priorities prioritizing mental health and wellness as a part of people's professional lives. So we're really happy to bring some of this material to you. The series that we have been doing over the last, 6 series, I guess this is the final in the whole trauma and traumatic stress series. We have talked about the signs and symptoms of traumatic stress and trauma on 5 different domains. So we've talked about the signs and symptoms relating to the physical, the cognitive, the emotional, the behavioral, and today we're going to talk about the worldview or spiritual side of what happens with trauma and traumatic stress and how that can affect areas of our lives. So we hope you find a lot of interesting information, and we're going to try to give you some tools and techniques to mitigate any negative effects. And if you have an interest and have not been able to listen to the other webinars that we've done in this series, NTTAC has the availability for you to go back and look at all of those, and we also have resources and links on our website at shiftwellness.org. It is our great pleasure, and it's a very humbling opportunity to be able to present to people who do such great work in our communities, and we are so excited to bring the material to you and to continue our support of officers who do the work of keeping our community safe. So thanks so much, and I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful trainers, and they're going to introduce themselves and start providing you with really helpful information. Have a great day, and please feel free to ask questions in, so that we can answer some of your questions directly. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Beth. My name is Dave Perteri. I'm the Director of State Investigations and also the Ohio ICAC Commander for the ICAC Task Force headquartered out of Cleveland, Ohio. I've been in law enforcement for the past 22 years now. I've spent the last 14 years working internet crimes against children cases. And I have a dual role, not only as the commander, but also as a special investigator, simply because of the workload that we're seeing now on a monthly basis, whether it's cyber tips that we're getting from the National Center, whether it's our own proactive work that we're doing. There's just obviously too much work for the majority of these ICAC task forces to handle. And I think that's why it's so important that we integrate mental health and wellness and resiliency training into everything we do with ICAC and with other law enforcement disciplines. So I'm certainly thrilled to be here with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Dave. I'm Jean McAllister, and I'm the mental health component of the team today. We always work in teams with law enforcement and mental health so that we have both perspectives to offer you while we're training. I own my own business. I do training, consulting, and expert testimony in the broad arena of interpersonal violence. I do a lot of work on child sex abuse, child sex trafficking, and sexual exploitation cases. So this is something I'm very involved in. My history is working as a psychotherapist with people who'd experienced trauma, including victims of child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation. And I also administered Colorado's Sex Offender Management Board for the first 5 years that we were in operation. So have been involved in this work my entire adult life. I have almost twice as many years in as Dave does. So I've been around for a while, and I'm just really honored to do this work and grateful that you all are doing everything you're doing in the community as well, because you're really making a difference in kids' lives. I'm going to overview briefly our objectives. We're going to give you a very brief introduction to secondary trauma and traumatic stress, just so you have a sense of what we're talking about if you haven't been to one of the other webinars. We're going to talk about how the body responds, because this really is centered in our biology. There are biological responses that happen when we experience trauma that change how we operate in many ways, and understanding that can be helpful when you're thinking about selecting tools to help yourself cope. We're going to discuss the worldview, or meaning-making, or spiritual signs and symptoms of traumatic stress and secondary trauma, look at how those things impact this component of our lives, and then we're going to talk about resilience and offer some tools and techniques to help you cope with that stress and trauma. So that's sort of an overview. And I want to start by saying that I want people to remember that no matter what your responses are or colleagues' responses, there's really no stigma in having these responses. They're normal responses to being exposed to serious trauma. And certainly the sexual abuse and sexual exploitation of children is serious trauma. And all human beings have them. So we always say no shame, no blame. It's just good to identify what's going on and figure out which tools are going to work best to help you cope with those things in a way that's going to be helpful to you.
And Jean, I think that's an important point, because obviously when we deal with mental health and wellness from a law enforcement standpoint, we as law enforcement are always concerned about that stigma, or how we're going to be perceived, whether or not something we tell someone is going to be used against us from a disciplinary standpoint or fit for duty. And I think it's important to reiterate that, you know, that's not what the shift classes are about. That's not what this training is about. We recognize at the Innocent Justice Foundation that, you know, these classes are designed to support ICAC teams in the field, affiliated agencies who are working these cases. And it's not just specific to the work that ICAC is doing, but law enforcement in general, folks who are exposed to some of the worst material, worst of the worst crime scenes, things that, you know, no human being should ever have to see. So we recognize that, you know, this exposure to the material, whether it's violent crimes, child sex abuse material, you know, it can have a negative long-term impact on professionals, law enforcement professionals, criminal justice professionals, and that's why this wellness support is so vital. It's important that, you know, we develop a strong foundation in most cases before we get into the work that we're doing. You know, how are we preparing ourselves at the beginning of the day, of the shift, so that we can get through there, or get through that time that we're working these cases as best we can.
Thanks,
Jean?
Dave. I think that's really important information for people to have. And I'm going to talk for a little bit about what secondary trauma is, and give you a brief overview of the classic trauma response. First of all, trauma can be experienced in one of three ways: as a single incident, as a repetitive experience like exposure to war, or exposure to repeated cases of child sexual exploitation, or some of the things that the victims we work with experience, like ongoing sexual abuse or those sorts of things. And then the third way is what is called vicarious exposure. And that means that we are not the primary victim of the trauma, but we have exposure to what the trauma is, many times to the impact on the victims who experience the trauma. Many times we interact with the people who caused the trauma. And it's important to note that in the mental health world, all of those types of exposure can cause trauma responses in human beings. You're not somehow protected from the experience of trauma because it's something you're working on or something that happened to children instead of to you. Also, I'd like you all to think about the fact that most law enforcement officers have experienced some degree of primary trauma, either threats or attacks or that sort of thing as well. So you may have both those types of exposure going on. And basically what happens when you are exposed to traumatic material is that physiologically stress chemicals are dumped into your body, and that does a couple of things. One is it shifts the operation of your being from what we call the prefrontal cortex, or that part of your brain that thinks and plans and has access to all your previous learning, and it shifts it to the more primitive part of your brain, the amygdaloid complex, and engages what are identified as survival responses. Because when your brain perceives trauma, it doesn't sort whether you're at risk or someone else is. It just wants you to act to survive. And so we engage those sort of primitive survival responses, and we are not always in charge of which of those we choose. And in our culture, we tend to talk about those survival responses as fight or flight, as if there are only a couple of options for those survival responses. And what's real is that we have 3 primary responses that happen to human beings. The first is fight. That makes sense. If there's a threat and you successfully fight or overcome the threat, then nobody gets hurt. Flight is if we are able to leave or take the child away from a bad situation, then nobody gets hurt. And the problem is that we also can experience a freezing response. We think that that comes from a time when we were all pretty much primary prey animals. When you talked about large predators like a bear or a wolf or a tiger, before we had weapons with substantially reliable aim, we were likely to end up being somebody's lunch if we got attacked by one of those large predators. Freezing is a way that really allows you to hide from a large predator because they often see movement rather than detail. And also some large predators don't eat dead things. And if you're laying very still or sitting very still, they often think that you're not going to be a good lunch, so they leave you alone. While that seems sort of like kind of crazy that we have those primitive responses, they are the full range of responses that happen to us. And pieces of information that we need to have when we're thinking about our own exposure to trauma is we can start having those responses when we're not experiencing trauma if things in the environment remind us about the trauma. It's also important to know that people who experience what we call successful fight or flight responses are much more likely to feel successful in their responses to trauma and much less likely to feel like they have been harmed by the trauma long term. Whereas freezing responses can make us feel like we've been harmed. And think about how often what we're doing is having to sit still looking at images or having to sit still interviewing an offender that we would really much rather not be being reasonable with, or having to listen to what's happened to a victim. All of those things can be perceived as freezing by our primitive brains. So it's important to note that when that happens, this can impact us physically because of the stress chemicals, cognitively or intellectually because of the way our brain function shifts and we don't always have access to our full cognitive abilities when the primitive part of our brain is running things. It impacts our emotional and relational well-being because trauma is perceived to be related to other human beings, particularly when you're working with child sexual exploitation. So you have both the experience of strong negative emotions about what's happening, but also the tendency to apply those to what you believe about people. The behavioral changes that can happen are often our attempts to cope with things like intrusive thoughts or memories of trauma, persistent worry, anxiety about kids or cases you're working with, or the kind of things we do to numb and kind of check out so we don't have to think about work. But unfortunately, when we numb and check out, we may numb and check out from our families, other people, and other things. And it also impacts what we believe about our own well-being, about the goodness or badness in the world, and our beliefs about what guides us, sort of in terms of values, belief systems, and spiritual beliefs. So all of those things can be impacted. We're focusing today on those things that impact our belief systems, our worldview, or our spiritual being. And a lot of times what we hear from people is they want a way to sort out what's the difference between what we know about. It's kind of normal that we sometimes have really tough cases and it's hard to deal with, and we have, really hard things happen. And so some reaction to that is absolutely normal and not indicative of being problematic at all. To when is somebody really kind of in trouble if they're having reactions? And we look at that on two domains. We look at the domain of how persistent or how often is this happening. Because these things are not always under our voluntary control, like you can be at a child's birthday party in your family or extended family, and you all of a sudden start thinking about a case at work or a child that you're worried about who might be in danger at work. Those things are absolutely normal when they happen periodically, or if you have a particularly difficult case going on. When they start happening more often or in more arenas of your life, they're more intermittent rather than just every once in a while or related to a specific case. That starts being a warning sign that you need to start using your tools to really help cope with these things. And if they're persistent, happening, daily or almost every day, or happening in a variety of different places regularly, those things are really trouble indicators and things you need to address quickly. And the other sort of thing that we look at is how intrusive into your life are they. If you wake up worrying about a case a couple of times when you have a bad one, sometimes even several days when you're doing a trial or you're getting ready for a search warrant that you think is going to be particularly difficult, that is not unusual, and that's not going to be seriously harmful to you. But if you're waking up multiple times a week and not sleeping consistently, over time, that can be problematic. And if you're really having difficulty sleeping, that can have an impact on your emotional and your physical health and on your mental health. So the level of disruptiveness is really important. And if it's a different kind of response, is it something that just happens once in a while when you're at work, or is this starting to spill over into your home life and it's causing problems there? So think about how disruptive it is and in what arenas of your life. And that's a great way to kind of gauge how serious is this and how much do I need to worry about it. Dave, would you talk about some of the things that are really compounding for people who are dealing with these issues?
Certainly, as I said, I've been in the ICAC world for 14 years now, and it pains me to say that, only within the last 4 or 5 years did I personally and did we as a task force really start focusing on the important issue of mental health and wellness. I think looking back on my career, there were certainly times where, some of the warning signs were there, and I didn't necessarily pay attention to it or focus on them. But, having the tools that Jean talked about, that's important to, help you cope with some of these things. Now, unfortunately, where we are now in terms of law enforcement, and especially in the ICAC world, we recognize that a lot of these compounding factors exist. We recognize that there are not enough resources, or in some cases, maybe we have insufficient resources to do the job that we need to do. Recognizing that technology and offenders are 10 steps ahead of us most days, that we need more resources, we need more manpower, because the volume of cases is just overwhelming. We recognize that, many cases may never get investigated. And, again, that pains me to say that, but we as a task force, at least here in Ohio, we have to prioritize the work that's coming in, the cyber tips that are coming in from NTTAC, proactive investigations that we may be working. So, we're going to triage cases as we can. We want to go after the worst of the worst. We want to look for those offenders who are, hands-on or prior registered sex offenders. So, we do our best in that arena there. And that caseload continues to grow. So, the caseload grows, the severity of the offenses grow. Those individuals who are working in the forensic side of the house that may be dealing for 8 to 10 hours a day with child sex abuse material, obviously, they're seeing the effects as well, and that's, aggravated over time. When we think of ourselves, one of the biggest things that we've tried to do is educate not only the general public, but also our command staff and those above us who may not be working the cases on a daily basis. We want them to understand just how bad this ICAC world is, the work that we do in law enforcement. And that means educating them about the types of material that we see, using the correct terminology when we talk about it, making, the public and our command staff understand that, this is something that really needs focus and attention, to bring about a better world. Unfortunately, in this time of 2020, and we're dealing with a pandemic right now, and we're also seeing a lot of negative coverage of law enforcement in the news and on social media. Okay, I know it affects me. I know it affects my colleagues, the investigators that work with me. That can be very difficult for a professional whose mantra is, I want to save children, or I want to protect the world, and then to see social media or mainstream news portray us in a negative light. I've had Facebook for 15 years now, and I cringe every time I press the Facebook icon on my phone, because I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to read or what I'm going to see or what I'm going to be subjected to just when I'm trying to enjoy some social media from the privacy of my own home. So, that coupled with this immense responsibility that we have to protect the public, protect the community, make sure we go after these offenders, obviously all have an impact in terms of, our mental health and our wellness. So, keep that in mind as you, employ some of these tools, as you employ some of these techniques. One of the things I always tell my investigators is that, at the end of the day, we've done our job. We've put offenders in jail. We've arrested them. We've gotten them off the streets, because we have a lot of investigators who see the failures in our justice system, and they react accordingly. But, there are some things that are out of our control. And I think that's important to remember, that if we do the best job we can on the streets, we're going to be better off down the road in terms of ourselves and our mental health. Jean?
Thanks, Dave. That's a really great overview of those issues that can really impact people as they're going through this. And so we have a question for you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about how this secondary trauma or vicarious trauma can really impact my worldview, and then we're going to ask about how you see impacts in your own belief systems. And one of the things I'm aware of, that I'm typically a fairly optimistic person, and I'm typically someone who says, yeah, well, that might be hard, but we're going to do it differently and we're going to figure it out. But when I am really negatively impacted in terms of my worldview or my belief systems, I start believing that most of the people in the world are bad people. And I know, I mean, I have done a lot of work in this arena. I know that sexual offenders are 6% or less of all the people in the population ever, and that those who are repetitive offenders against children are a much smaller percentage than that. So if I start having these beliefs that people are bad and they're not good and they're not helpful, that's when I know I've been really profoundly impacted in my worldview arena. Do you have an example, Dave, of something that's impacted you?
You know, I think it's just how, like, I would agree with you, Jean. I think it's just how we view the world. You know, there's obviously a lot of things that we see in the public and in social media that, you know, impact us negatively, but I think I try and focus on all that's out there that is good. I think, you know, working with the folks that we work with, coming to work every day, sharing the stories and, you know, case-related information, you know, that helps us, you know, recognize why we do what we do. So, you know, for me, I've found a lot, I've gotten a lot out of my faith life. I was not really involved in faith until 2013. I needed something to, you know, kind of bring me back to center, and I found that in my church. I became a law enforcement chaplain several years ago. So, you know, focusing on the faith aspect, focusing on, you know, my own wellness and mental health, that's helped me be a better person. And I think, you know, those around me would agree that, you know, it's helped them as well.
That's a good thing to hear, because it's really important that we find ways to help take care of ourselves. I'm going to ask the group now to think about worldview impacts they've seen in themselves or in others. I think we have a poll everywhere question, and would like you just to type in things you've seen, and they'll show up on the screen so that everybody can see them, and nobody will know whose answer is whose. Wow, you all are putting down some really important things. It's hard when you stop thinking things will get better, and you're also identifying some things in other realms like depression and anger and feeling despair. Hopelessness is really about how we view the world and whether there is a possibility for something better. And some of you are identifying also some of those emotions that can feel more entrenched, like bitterness or feeling like you have to shut people out or people won't change, those sorts of things. Feeling hatred. Wow, great job at identifying some of these impacts that really address our worldview and ones that address other parts of our responses. So those of you who haven't seen the other webinars, you might want to follow through with those. Really appreciate your paying attention to that and being so thoughtful about your responses. I think we're going to end the poll and move on so that we get to cover everything. So thanks for being so willing to share. I really profoundly appreciate that. I think that's really important. So these are some of the things that we're going to see when we have worldview impacts. And they're going to be really important for us. Dave is going to talk to you a little bit about this.
Yeah, you know, I think we saw some great responses there. I think, we all realize one of the things that is great for me, at least with regards to mental health and wellness, is, when we realize that we're all in the same boat. We're all going through this as criminal justice professionals, as ICAC task force members, any profession certainly could be impacted by some of the signs and symptoms and some of the responses that we saw there. So, I think it's important, that we remember why we do what we do, why we got into this in the first place. Maybe it requires a change in, your spiritual view or your life outlook or the world as you see it. Because we can obviously obsess at times over certain things. We worry about what other people think about us or what the world is saying about us as a profession. So I think it's important to, not necessarily adjust to the times in every case, but also understand, especially what it is that's affecting you and what you can do to rectify or correct some of these signs and symptoms. Jean?
Great advice. Yep, that's great advice. I think also it's important to know how you cope with this. So if you can tell us a little bit about what you do to kind of cope when you feel worldview impacts, or if you have a partner or a colleague who does a great job of connecting with this to make a difference, I think that's great. Oh, wow. I'm already seeing some great skills. This is so exciting because everything I'm seeing on here is helpful. The things about meditating and breathing and going for a walk outside are all about mindfulness, being in the moment. That's very protective. Having some of the things you're talking about in terms of, biking or listening to music or having a hobby or those sorts of things really give you a different perspective on the world than what our work does. Exercise helps address the stress chemicals. And, wow, even Tai Chi and Qigong, that's great. You all are doing a great job. And the other thing I'm noticing is talking to people, connecting with friends, talk to colleagues, and making sure that you're limiting negativity that comes in from other places when you're feeling bad. Those things are all exceptional. There's a lot of strength in this group of participants. So I just want to honor that and make sure that you all know that, which is really important.
So when I got into, when I started working at ICAC cases 2004, at the time I was, my hobby involved graphic design and graphic arts. And I realized shortly after I got into computer crimes that the last thing I wanted to do was come home after a long day and have a hobby that involved the computer. And so my wife said to me one day, you need to get another hobby. And so that ended up becoming cake decorating. And so, obviously slightly odd for a law enforcement guy to say he decorates cakes, but it's something that I can do with my children. It's something that has nothing to do with computers, internet crimes, and it brings me joy. And obviously, who doesn't like cake? So, that's the important thing here is find something that relieves stress. A lot of great answers to the poll question there. Find something that brings you joy, because at the end of the day, that's really what's important.
And y'all have to watch this great little video on the Shift Wellness website, because Dave makes a cake on the website. It's great. It's really fun. And he infuses meaning into his cake on top of it, which is a great way to address this kind of impact. One of the things we recommend sometimes is that people think about doing a mission statement, a reminder for themselves about why they're doing the work. Because honestly, your commitment and your belief about what's important about your work is something that's really protective. Dave, do you want to talk any more about that piece?
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that, most of you in your respective agencies have a mission statement. Your agency has a mission statement that is written out and posted on the wall. and it directs, the mission of your organization, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, the policies, the principles that you're going to follow in a concise, brief statement. And I would encourage you to do the same thing for your own personal lives, for your own self. Physically write out why you do what you do. What gets you up every morning? What gets you going through the door or investigating the cases that you investigate? It's good to be able to visually see that every single day. My mission statement is right next to my desk, but I also have a picture of a child that we saved years ago. I keep it in my desk drawer, and it acts as a mission statement, because when I have a day where I feel like hanging it up, or I say to myself that, I'm not sure I can do this anymore, all I have to do is pull open that drawer and see that picture, and it immediately makes me realize, that there are important things left in the world, and, there's things that we need to do. So take some time, immediately after this webinar to, kind of jot down some things that are important to you and help you understand your own mission. Jean?
I think that's wonderful, and I love that you have a reminder of what some of the good you've done in the world by thinking about that child that you rescued so long ago, because we may not be able to save every child, but boy, we make a difference in the lives of those we can, and that's really important. Those of you who identified things that are related to mindfulness, whether that's active meditation or breathing or yoga, qigong, or whether it's something more informal like spending time outdoors and that sort of thing, that's really powerful, because it keeps you being in the present moment, it keeps you in a relaxed state, and it can help you pull away from all the stress and the trauma. One of the things that's really powerful for me is inspirational quotes or readings, and they've been really powerful throughout my life, and I use them often. One of my favorites is from Alice Walker, who had a very traumatic childhood. She's an author and a poet, but I had for years a poster of her in a garden, and I love to garden, which is another way to get away from this kind of work. But she has a quote that says, "I am the woman offering 2 flowers whose roots are twin, justice and hope. Let us begin." And it kind of covers the range of kind of work I do, and it really is powerful for me to think about that. And any time you're spending time with your family or friends or children who are not abused, you're doing reparative work. The research on trauma says that the single best coping skill is the presence and use of social support. So those times you spend with others who you care about and who bring joy into your life are so important. And those of you who are dog people or cat people or horse people, all of those kinds of things are powerful, because animals actually help regulate our breathing, and they tend to make us more mindful. And anytime we're outside, away from screens, is also helpful and positive in this arena.
And that's where, that's where volunteering comes into play. That's where being involved with, church or faith-based practices. Gene, I agree completely that, it's important to have people in your life that you can trust and respect, right? Obviously, in law enforcement, we want to have folks around us that we can trust. They have our back, we have theirs. But the same should apply for mental health and wellness and resiliency and ways to reduce your stress. Because when you're around people that you trust and you honestly care about, I believe that your stress is reduced, tenfold just by being in their presence. We're obviously stuck in our ways as law enforcement officers, but for me, being open to new thoughts and ideas and constantly thanking the folks that I work with, that's helped me, more than anything, to be able to, be a better law enforcement and criminal justice professional.
I think that's incredibly powerful, Dave. I love that. And one of the things I sometimes forget to do myself when I'm stressed that can be so incredibly helpful is to overtly note my gratefulness for the people I care about, the work that I love, and the other things in the world that make my life good. And there's a lot of research that identifies that sort of gratitude practice as something that's also protective against trauma. This is one that I think is really important. We have to be responsible for our own wellness because ultimately we're the ones who know when we're impacted, and we're the ones who have to take action to make a difference. And we have to see this work as a marathon, not a sprint. I have in my career watched far too many people leave this work because they let themselves get so overwhelmed by the trauma that they burn out. And in the same way that you don't run full out if you're planning on running 26 miles, you don't, put everything into everything all the time without taking care of yourself along the way. And so I just think we need to frame it in that way for ourselves, to let ourselves know that it's okay to take time to take care of ourselves. It actually makes us better able to stay in the work for longer periods of time.
Yeah, and I think, I wish we had had this conversation about mental health and wellness, in 2000 when the ICAC task force program was getting off the ground. We would obviously be in a much better place as professionals, if we had that foundation going into this, because I firmly believe that we are better off when we talk about mental health and wellness before we start working these types of cases, before we get into law enforcement. We want to establish that foundation so that we can, do great things and move forward, knowing that we have the tools and the techniques to, take care of ourselves. Because at the end of the day, like Jean said, if we're not, in the right frame of mind, then obviously we're going to have issues down the road. We're going to be of very little value to the organization. So, with that foundation comes the understanding and the meaning, and again, the reasons why we continue to do what we do. Jean?
Beautifully said. I really appreciate that, Dave. We're really talking about some sort of work-life balance, and many times it's not a balance in the amount of time we spend. We all know that there are days we spend long time at work and less time at home, but we're talking about paying attention to work and life in equal measure over time, and that is going to make our lives better. And we're going to kind of wind up here with a poll question where we'd like to ask you, is there a tool or technique either that you were already using that got verified as something strong you're doing, or a new one that you learned or heard about today that you might use as you go through the next period of your work? Okay, you've already got a convert, Dave, for baking a cake.
Good. Great.
All right, that's wonderful. Oh, people are going to volunteer, getting outside, getting in nature. The personal mission is something new. And paying attention to your spiritual practice is so powerful. You have shared a lot about that, Dave, and I think that's so important for people. Music is another way of finding meaning. Hunt fairies and dragons with my grandchildren. I love that. Oh, you all are doing a great job. Just lovely. Somebody wrote dog cuddles. That's great. Because they're really good at that. Ooh, somebody identified a YouTube channel that's got calming, it sounds like harp music. Wonderful. Really, really great responses. You all are incredibly powerful in terms of your commitment and your paying attention and you're taking time to think about what you're going to do. I think we'll end the poll. and just end with a little bit of information about what we identify as transformational meaning. It is identified as one of the kind of ultimate symbols of recovery from negative trauma exposure. And really what it is being able to not deny that there are bad things or that the trauma happened, but not have it shape who you are or frame who you are. And I think that's really incredibly important, remembering that you have a reason why you do this work. And for instance, when I'm testifying and I have the 80th defense attorney for the year screaming at me about something and how awful I am, I think about the fact that I'm a voice for children who can't speak for themselves, and that makes me just fine with somebody yelling at me. So what you can do to develop your own transformational meaning is a way to hold on to this really positive and positive impact around the meaning in your world. Beth, would you like to?
Sure. Let's move into some questions. We have a couple here, so I'm just going to read out what they've put in, and either of you can speak to them. The first is someone would like examples of including mental health and wellness within agency policies, so it's a normal part of operation, not an emergency. Like how? So it's a preventative care. So if you can talk a little bit about the importance of that and how people might find out information.
Yeah, you know, and that's really where we stumbled across the Innocent Justice Foundation and the work that they're doing as a task force. You know, as I said earlier, up until 5 or 6 years ago, we did not have a wellness policy that was part of our operational policy. That was part of our prosecutor's office policy. So we had some folks who ultimately came to me one day and said, you know, I don't like what this job has done to me, and they basically ended up just retiring or leaving the agency. And it was that light bulb moment where I realized that we needed to sit down with our command staff and draft something in writing, put it in the policy. And I know that the Innocent Justice Foundation, as well as a number of the ICAC commanders and task forces out there, have policies that they've used. I know we would be willing to share you know, a multitude of policies so that you have something in writing, because you really need to get your folks on board that are above you to understand that this is something that needs to be in place now, as opposed to, you know, when you need it and then it's too late.
I think that's a great idea. And I also think a way to start in that arena, if you don't have permission to develop a policy yet, is bring some training into your agency and expose people to the idea that it's not about, you know, fitness for duty, it's not about therapy or counseling, but it really is about spending some time and attention on wellness and support. No different than protecting people in the way that you make sure they have decent vests, you make sure they have helmets when they're going to be exposed to gunfire. You really want to make sure that they have good coverage for their mental health as well.
Yeah, great point.
You know, Gene, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Dave.
There's a question that's asking about the stigma of dealing with mental health, and I think that sort of ties into what we just talked about, is that, you know, when we sat down to draft our policy, we made it clear that this was not going to be a disciplinary, it was not going to involve any discipline or fit for duty. And so we contracted with a mental health professional who has that confidentiality built in. And our folks know that, you know, they can go in and talk to this individual or this mental health professional whenever and wherever they need it without fear of any reprisal or anything coming back on them. And that's helped reduce that stigma. If they know that they can go in and have a casual conversation with somebody that we've contracted with, obviously that helps reduce that stigma. And I think the more we talk about it in these webinars and the trainings that SHIFT does, I think that helps everybody realize, like I said earlier, that we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know for us, as we've been training over the years, providing training, one of the things we've really been trying to focus on is that everybody is not at the same place. So we try to give tools and techniques on an individual level, on a team level, and on a whole organization level. So most of our material, and some of that you will find on our website, speaks to individual things you can just do as a person on a team to help sort of model the behavior of taking away that stigma and being more open to doing things by example, like modeling good prioritization of well-being just in your own behavior, and then relating that back to the team. And the commanders of ICAC have been essential, absolutely essential in getting this message and changing this culture for their people. It's really been an amazing thing to see. So I would encourage anyone, I know that we're running out of time here, so I would just encourage you, if we didn't answer your questions, please reach out to us. I know there was some questions about EMDR, which that has proven to be a very good therapy. There's a lot of research that has been done on utilizing that technique for military vets and also for other people who have had traumatic experiences, and that has been a very good intervention. And you know, there's just a lot of questions for us to get to, so please feel free to reach out to us. You have our emails here. We are happy to help get you more information if you need it, and we hope you got a lot of information from us today.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Beth. Dave and Jean, thank you for yet another wonderful and outstanding presentation. And to our audience members, thank you all for joining. We're going to end today's webinar with just a few housekeeping reminders for folks. Please note that if you'd like to get in contact with OJJDP's NTTAC, you may do so by clicking on the link here in order to reach out to us, including signing up for our listserv, where you can find out about additional upcoming trainings and additional resources. You can also check us out on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. If you'd like to get in contact with OJJDP, you can do so via the help desk. You may dial the number here or click on the email address here that will allow for you to easily email and access. Also, sign up for OJJDP's Just listserv to receive more information about upcoming trainings or even additional resources. Do you have a training or technical assistance need? Well, if so, please be sure to submit a request in the TTA 360 platform. You can access the TTA 360 platform through the URL here on this slide. Again, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be placed on NTTAC's YouTube page. Please contact OJJDP TTA Help Desk if you would like to get access to any type of additional webinar materials, including the transcript or even supporting materials. Please take a moment to review this slide, including the attribution and the disclaimer. And join us for these upcoming webinar events. We have a few coming up for the month of September with our colleagues with Zero Abuse and NTTAC. We also have two additional events coming up at the end of September here with our colleagues with, again, Zero Abuse again, and the Western Regional Child Advocacy Center, CAC. We encourage you to please click on the links here to register or even to learn more about each of these respective events here. And lastly, finally, I have one last poll question for everyone as we wrap up today. And essentially, we want to know, how do you plan to apply the information from your work, to your work, excuse me. from this webinar to your work. Please note that this is indeed multiple select, so you may come in and actually type in, or excuse me, select multiple options here. Just click on the box that correlates to your answer. Feel free to make multiple selections here. Again, on behalf of our colleagues at the Innocent Justice Foundation and OJJDP's NTTAC, we thank you all very much for attending today's webinar. Have a wonderful afternoon. Goodbye.
No.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you and goodbye.